Question 3 on the AQA Germany paper asks you to look at both the interpretations used for questions 1 and 2 and says, which interpretation do you find more convincing about? That's the stem of the question, that's a bit of highlighted there, and that never changes. And it will give you something to focus on. So for example here, what life was like for women in Nazi Germany. Now I'd ask you to focus your answer using interpretations A and B and your contextual knowledge. So for good marks, we'll need to make sure we reference all three of those things in our answer. Now, how should you answer this question? Well, as always, the first step is a bit of planning. Go back and look at the content again from each interpretation. And by now in the exam, you should be pretty familiar with what they say because you've used them for questions 1 and 2. The content is all you need for this question. Don't worry about the provenance here. Just a reminder of what the content is of both interpretations, if you want to pause the video here. Now, this question is basically asking which is more convincing, which is more believable, which is true. So you need to look at both interpretations and decide what the message of each is. Overall, what is it they're trying to say? That's what your exam is looking. Have you understood the interpretation and what they're trying to say? So here, for interpretation A, the message is that women under the Nazis had a harsh life, being forced to be mothers with opportunity to take part in careers being limited for them. And you might just bullet point down a few notes about that before you start writing. Then for interpretation B, the message is that women wanted to be housewives and mothers. They were happy the Nazis supported them in this. Once you've understood the message of both, decide which you believe is more convincing and why. Now, there's no correct answer here. You're going to have thousands of students who pick interpretation A, thousands who pick interpretation B. The key bit is you're able to explain why, and you must pick one because that's what the question wants. Which is more convincing, which is true, which is believable. Now we're ready to start our writing once we've planned. So we're going to start off by telling our examiner the messages of the interpretation. Write it like this. Interpretation A is convincing. We've got that key word in there about what life was like for women under Nazi Germany as it helps to highlight how women under the Nazis had a harsh life, being forced to be mothers with opportunities to take part in careers being limited for them. I've put the message in there straight away. I've shown my examiner I've understood what they're trying to say. Now I need to give a short quote from that interpretation that backs that message up and explain how it links to the message of the interpretation, just to prove I've not made it up. So, I know this as interpretation A says, women have been deprived of all rights except that of childbirth and labour. And now I'm telling you how it links back. This links to life for women in Nazi Germany as it shows the limited role women were expected to follow in Nazi Germany and how the focus for them was on having children. And now I'm looking to bring in my own knowledge and explain how I know this is convincing. Now you're aiming for 5 to 8 lines of relevant detail and knowledge of this time period. This might be a bit much that I've written here down. You're just looking for precise detail and you can always add more later. You can always do it at asterisks and come back to this question if you've got time. But you're just looking to show you know what life was like at this time, that contextual knowledge. So I've written here, I know this is convincing, again I've repeated that keyword, as the Nazis had been concerned about the birth rate in Germany. By 1933 it had dropped to around 970,000 births a year and continued to decrease. This was linked to more women focusing on careers after being given more freedom under the Weimar government. As Hitler wanted a large German army, he looked to encourage more women to have children. Hitler said women should stick to the 3 Ks, Kinder, Kirche and Küche, or children, church and cooking. And as a result, within months of Hitler coming to power, many female doctors, teachers, lawyers and judges were sacked, which links in with interpretation A stating careers and professions are closed to them. So again, I've just given another quote here, just kept that answer nice and tight. I wouldn't do more than one extra quote like I've done here though. And therefore, getting a job as a woman was strongly discouraged as it might get in the way of producing children. Now, you can see here where I've brought that own knowledge in. Again, if time's a bit of an issue in the exam, just writing that top half would be enough. You wouldn't need to go up to the 3 Ks, for example. And if you've got time, just link back briefly in one or two sentences to sum up your points. So overall, interpretation A is convincing, as it shows that life for women in Nazi Germany was very limited, with women being forced to focus on having children and not achieving careers they wanted instead. Now, that's what this would look like in the paragraph. And you can see there that keyword convincing that I've kept repeating that because that's what the question was. Why is it convincing? So now we need to move on to interpretation B. I'd start the answer off with, I find interpretation B more convincing or less convincing than interpretation A. That shows your view straight away. It shows that you've picked one. So here, I've gone for it being more convincing. Now I'm repeating that process again. Message, quote to back it up, then bringing in my own knowledge and then linking back. So, message, we looked at this earlier. It shows how the Nazis wanted to be housewives and mothers, were happy that the Nazis supported them in this. Where's a quote to prove that? I know this as interpretation B says, my main ambition was to become a mother, and I've explained how that links back. And then I'm looking to bring in my own knowledge again. So I've said, I know this is convincing as the Nazis focused on indoctrinating young girls in education and the BDM youth movement, that this was their role in society. This meant that many grew up not wanting other careers as they believed their duty was to raise children and be housewives. School lessons such as home economics would have pushed these ideas, as shown in a quote, we were taught everything that was necessary to be a woman. The government also gave benefits to mothers, such as loans given to newly married couples to encourage them to have children. These loans were equivalent to a year's wages, and for each child they had, they could keep a quarter of the money. Therefore, if they had 4 children, they kept all of the loan. And finally, I'm just linking back again. Overall interpretation B is more convincing, so I've shown my viewpoint again there to the examiner, as it shows the impact of Nazi indoctrination on women, and how many accepted their new role in society without question as a result. Now, if we're looking for a higher level, so we're looking at 7 or 8 out of 8 here, we're just going to do a short conclusion, just recapping which of these two is more convincing and explaining why. And remember, there is no correct answer here. So here's my conclusion for this answer. Overall, I believe both interpretations show life for women in Nazi Germany well. However, I believe interpretation B is more convincing, as it shows the impact of the Nazis on women and how the government rewarded those who acted as they wished. Whilst interpretation A is accurate to say the Nazis tried to force women from careers, I know that in the long term, the Nazis needed women in factories to work because more men were joining the army. As more died after the Second World War began in 1939, it was essential that thousands of women took on job roles in factories as well as being mothers. Therefore, interpretation A is less convincing than interpretation B about what life was like for women in Nazi Germany. And a model answer would look like this as a result. A focus on A, then B, then a short conclusion. So just a few things before we end this video. Remember, keep using the focus word of the question convincing in your answer. That's what it's looking for you to do, which is more believable. Another thing is to focus on the message of the interpretation. Now, it can be quite tempting to take both interpretations and analyze it line by line. It says this, I know this is true as. It also says this, I know this is true as. Don't do this. Your examiner's not looking for you to analyze line by line. Your examiner's looking, have you read this interpretation and understood the overall message? And if you follow the structure I've given you there, that will help you to achieve maximum marks. A final thing about your own knowledge as well, always go back and add more own knowledge later on. This can be a bit of a time sink, this question. So if you feel like you're running out of time, follow that structure. You can always go back, do a little asterisk, and add more knowledge later on. Please make sure it is your own knowledge. Please do not bring in facts from the interpretation and claim them as your own. For example, don't say you know that people went to bridal schools, because that's mentioned in interpretation B. Your examiner will know this. They will know the interpretations off by heart at this point. So please do not try and bring in own knowledge from interpretations as your own. Make sure it is actual own knowledge that's relevant.